shoulders loosen. Ro murmurs at last about the horribleness of their day. Department politics, microaggressions and misgendering, minor sabotage from their arch-rival Bettina Quark, more microaggressions, a seminar gone cannibalistic. Jamie puts the book aside and kneads Ro's shoulders in the mulled, wine-scented bathwater. Ro's eyes pop open. Oh, shit! I was so pissed off, I think I left my phone at the coffee place near campus. They're closing soon. I ought to... Stay. Soak. Jamie lifts off her haunches. I'll go get it. Pizza's coming in 15 minutes. Save me some. I love you. Ro closes their eyes again, smiling this time. It's only a 5-minute drive to the coffee place. No big deal. The whole time, Jamie reflects on the paradox that she never feels more taken care of than when she's able to do something nice for her partner, because that level of trust is the warmest, softest embrace you could possibly have. And I'm just going to read a tiny bit of another section. Jamie's working in Diesel Cafe, and she finds herself thinking about her partner, Ro. She can't imagine what her life would be like if she hadn't found them when she did. It's like speculating about what life on Earth might have developed, what kind of life might have developed on Earth if our sun had been a blue giant. Ro makes Jamie's brain do a wild and gleefully uncoordinated dance, makes her skin tingle, brings her heart to life. Joy is always present, just at the edge of the frame, even in the bleakest of times. The world seems huge and undiscovered. People talk about relationships in terms like, I like who I am when I'm with them, or they make me want to be a better person, as if the purpose of love was self-improvement. But fuck that. The purpose of love is love.
Hey, Charlie.
Hey, Danny. Can I call you Danny?
Please.
Okay, good.
Please, Danny or Daniel, just never Dan. I'm so pleased to be here tonight talking about this book with you. How does it feel to be here?
Oh my God, I'm so excited. I love seeing so many familiar faces in the audience. I love just like, I don't know, the outpouring of love I've seen for this book all day today. It's so nice to like, you wake up in the morning and you're like, oh, it's book launch day, and you don't know what you're going to get. You don't know if it's going to be, and like just seeing that people are embracing the book and really getting it just makes me so, so happy. And now I just got to go do it in like 10 more cities.
Yeah, I was struck by, obviously everyone here is aware of you and what you do and what this book is about. But if you were just going by these readings right here, you would think this is a wonderful book about very supportive partners who have had a difficult day. And I wonder if perhaps part of the reason you wanted to read those particular paragraphs was because you were feeling a little bit in need of that yourself.
I mean, maybe. I think that's like, I don't know. I mean, when I started writing this book, the relationship between Jamie and Ro was kind of just like a little minor grace note. It was like all about Jamie and her mother, Serena. And that really is the heart of the book, Jamie's relationship with Serena, which is a spiky relationship. And those passages are more spiky because it's a mother-daughter relationship. They have all this history. It's much more intense. And, it's hard to find like a 3 or 4 minute section that has like that kind of satisfying arc to it, the way that little section did with the bath and everything. There's just something really pure about Jamie's relationship with Ro, and it obviously goes through some stuff in the course of the book. I ended up really getting super invested in it, and like I feel like if you're just going to get a glimpse of the book, it's just that kind of shows you that there's a lot of warmth and joy in the book, which is something that I really want people to know. It is a book about Jamie and her mother has been through some really rough times, and Jamie is trying to help her mother come back from that by teaching her how to be a witch, which is actually probably the worst way you could come up with to help your mom, get herself back together after some setbacks. It's really not a good idea. Just FYI, anybody out there, if your mother is going through some stuff, do not teach her how to do magic. It will not help. It is not a good idea. It's the worst plan.
But that did feel surprisingly true to life. Not the teaching your mother how to be a witch part, but I don't know how many people here would say, I feel confident that as an adult, I've given my own mother really good advice.
Oh my God, yeah.
I think often we think, oh, I'm ready to start parenting my parents now. And if we were to ask them, they would maybe have a different answer of whether you would or not. And so I do think that really speaks to a fundamental truth about like the adult parent-child relationship, which is, I have some good ideas for you now. And they're based on like careful observation of you over the last 30 or 40 years. Like, they're grounded in something, but then they're also so wrong at the same time.
Yeah, and part of what I'm getting at in this book is you never really know your parents as well as you think you do. You think that you kind of understand all about your parents, but really you know the side of them that they've shown to you over the course of parenting you. You don't know their work selves. You don't know who they were before they had you. You don't know. There's a lot of stuff that we don't, like I've never had kids, but there's a lot of stuff that people don't necessarily want their kids to know about them. And, that they choose to keep from their kids as much as they can. And so, there's just this barrier, like your mom or your dad or your parent is not just another person. It's somebody who has this really unique role in your life. And part of you is always going to be viewing them with this child brain from when they were this all-powerful entity in your life. And it's just so different. I think that, sorry, I'm trying to find my way back to the question, but basically I think that, sometimes I think I'm able to give my mom good advice about some things, like, about technology for sure, because my mom has problems with technology sometimes, about just like my mom will call me for advice now about like personal dilemmas, and I do my best. And it can be a little weird, but also, I think some of us, this is a little heavy, but I think some of us always were parenting our parents, even when we were little. Like, I think that that's a thing that happens. And it's a thing that is a common experience of many people who, whose parents were maybe dealing with a lot of stuff when they were kids. And so they had to kind of step up and be responsible for stuff, even as a child.
Yeah, I think the thing that interests me the most, I'm obviously not going to be talking about anything that happened beyond the first chapter or two, because it's the first day. You can't all have read it. And I don't want to offer anyone spoilers, but the book does open with this sort of decision that Jamie makes, which is, I think my mother needs a sort of kickstart. Maybe if I explain to her that I'm a witch, that will be useful to her. But then she doesn't do that. Like, you can kind of imagine, like, if you were picking up this book and sort of expecting what you sort of might expect from something in this genre, it would be, well, she's going to tell her she's a witch, she will use these words, and then her mother will be at first maybe baffled, not believe her, or express skepticism. And that's not exactly what happens. She, for some magical reasons and for some personal reasons, really, it's a little bit like two cats trying to help each other. Like, she shows her mother a ritual and conspicuously avoids explaining it. And her mother, instead of saying, this is very weird that you've taken me to the woods and shown me meat, is just sort of like, this gives me some really interesting insight into you and to what you want. And then, later kind of comes back and it's like, so I tried to do a version of this. I put some salmon somewhere. And I think it's really interesting that there's like conspicuous withholding of explanation, but also profound understanding. Like, they are, at least in that moment, really on the same wavelength. And then it diverges rapidly because her mother's like, I had a great idea. I thought I would just do this again. And I was wondering if that was something you were doing consciously, like you didn't want to have a big, I don't believe you moment. Oh, but look, the pencil is spinning. Like Willow has just shown all the other girls at college that she can do more magic than they can.
I do feel like she kind of explains in a roundabout way in that opening chapter. She doesn't like explain, but she does a little bit. It's very confusing. I think it's intentionally confusing it's confusing for Serena. Hopefully not for the reader, because I think I do explain it to the reader. But I think part of what I loved about writing Jamie is that she's somebody who simultaneously overthinks things and also represses things that she just is not going to think about at all. And I feel like that's something I can relate to a lot. I think a lot of us are overthinkers and also not going to think about that at all. Bye. That doesn't even exist. And I think that Jamie, for various reasons, has decided that magic only works if you don't think too much about it or talk about it. And so part of what happens is that, yeah, Jamie has these, like, I want to say almost hang-ups about magic, some of which are shared by other witches when we finally meet other witches. Bit of a spoiler, but not a big one. But some of which are just in Jamie's own head, because Jamie doesn't know what she's doing, and she's just decided that talking about it will ruin it, and it won't work anymore if she talks about it.
Yeah.
And so that is just how I think about magic. Like, I feel like if I could do magic in real life, I would think of it as something that must not be explained, or it's going to just go away.
Yeah, I was curious.
Like a joke.
I know that the whole book isn't about, here's how everything works in this particular magical system. But I was wondering, were there other, either fictional or historical magical systems that influenced how you thought about and wrote about it here? And if so, do you want to tell us? Because that would
I mean, I feel like there's a handful of books about witches and about magic and witchcraft and stuff where it is very much like, it's just mysterious and dreamlike, and it's never, things just kind of happen and people do things, and then there's like an unexpected result. A book that I talk about a lot is The Memory Garden by Mary Rickard, which came out like 15 years ago. It's about this old woman who's a witch, and people throw shoes at her house because she's a witch, and she takes all the shoes and turns them into planters in her garden, so her garden is like a shoe garden. And she adopts a baby, and she raises the baby to be a witch as well. And it's just, I haven't reread it since it came out, but I remember the magic is just very confusing and mysterious and dreamlike. And that's really what I like for magic. I like magic that is just, you can't really make sense of it. It's just what it is.
Yeah. I was wondering too, I know you've written elsewhere about the influence that A.S. Byatt's position had on this book. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit, both about, how that worked, and then also like what it's like, because we haven't even mentioned this, but there's also a fictional book within this book. There's an 18th century book called Emily in here that is often referenced at the beginning of each chapter, and I would love to hear a little bit more about developing that.
Yeah, that was a thing that kind of grew over time. I mean, so back when I was in college, I got really interested in 18th century literature because there were all these like interesting feuds and like fights and like rivalries and like people trying to take each other down by writing long novels to each other. And
like a question like, what is this genre going to be?
Yeah, it was the beginning of the novel as we know it, and it was also kind of the beginning of like industrial capitalism as we know it. It was like the earliest moments of that. And those two things are very much linked, as I kind of mentioned a few times in this book. And I was taught that there were like a handful of dudes who were like the important people in 18th century literature. And it wasn't until I started, like my first draft of this book, I think Jamie is doing research for her dissertation on 18th century literature. And I think it's just going to be about some dudes. And then I started doing more research myself and found out what I didn't learn in college, which is that there were all these women writing amazing books. Books that were just as interesting, if not more so, and just as popular, if not more so, than the men's books. And, I just got obsessed. And I got obsessed with certain figures like Jane Collier, who's a big deal in this book, who wrote this like sarcastic, satirical book called The Art of Ingeniously Tormenting, which is, have you read it? It's incredible. Have you read it?
It's fantastic.
It's incredible. And like, okay, go on YouTube. There's a company a nonprofit called LibriVox that does public domain, free readings of public domain books. And you can find a YouTube video that's all of The Art of Ingeniously Tormenting, read to you by someone with like a very plummy British accent, just explaining how to make people's lives hell. If you have power over somebody, you can torment them in all these different ways. And so Jane Collier I was super fascinated with, and then Charlotte Church, who is this gender non-conforming transmasc icon of like the 1730s. And so I started just collecting these little bits and pieces, and that turned into me building out this whole story about this novel I invented called Emily, which is kind of it's like my attempt at like playing around with the themes of 18th century novels about like women trying to be virtuous and trying to like control their own lives to the extent that you could in that era, while still being a good person and not like, falling into sin or depravity or whatever. And so, long story short, I had this whole storyline about finding out about this 18th century novel, and I was like, shoot, now I have to actually make it like work as part of the narrative. And so I did go back to Possession by A.S. Byatt. I don't know, have you all read it? It's a book that, like, it's a classic. It is a masterpiece. It is a book about these two academics who find this correspondence that hints at like a secret affair between these two Victorian poets. And it's like, ooh, it's like a detective story about like finding out if these two Victorian poets hooked up, and and meanwhile the two academics who are on the detective hunt also hook up, and so it's like two romances, a romance inside a romance, with tons of like actually surprisingly amazing fake 19th century poetry. And so that was the kind of gold standard, I thought. And so I just kind of like cribbed from that a lot. I reread it, I studied it, and then I basically wrote a bunch of fake 18th century letters and excerpts from this novel and various other things. And what I would do, promise I'm almost done, what I would do is I would have a million tabs open on my browser of like, Project Gutenberg with all these different 18th century books, plus Samuel Johnson's dictionaries on the internet. Like Samuel Johnson's, and it's searchable. There's like Samuel Johnson's dictionary. I forget the URL, but I used to have it like open on my website, on my browser all the time. You can go there and type in any word and see how Samuel Johnson defines it and examples of how he thinks it could be used in a sentence. So I did that obsessively. Every line of my fake 18th century writing, I'd be like, can I use this word? How would Samuel Johnson think I should use this word? Please help me, Samuel Johnson. And like, I used to think Samuel Johnson was like kind of a piece of shit, but he actually turns out to have been a pretty cool guy. That was another thing I found out in my research.
I was curious too if there were more books than Emily in here that were also fake. Like, there were certain points where I was like, I'm pretty sure Sarah Fielding is real, but I'm gonna have to go back and double check. Like,
no, she's real. Everything is real except for Emily, and except for like the kind of the story I make up about why Emily exists and stuff. Everything else is real. And like Sarah Fielding, another total badass. I think she and Jane Collier were married. I think that they were wives. They lived together for a long time until Jane died. Sarah Fielding was a total badass. Yeah, the Female Quixote is a real novel about like what if Don Quixote was a girl. Like, it's actually not as good as it sounds, unfortunately. But
maybe that'll be the next book in the series. I was going to ask you, did you find that there were moments when you were either torn between like, I want to write more Emily, but I have to get back to the present, or that you would find I'm more invested in the present story than I am in?
No, I wrote the minimum amount of Emily that I could get away with, honestly. Like, I was like, this is hard. I wrote enough Emily that it holds water. And my editor did actually come back to me and say, we need one more 18th century letter at this part of the book just to kind of shore up this part. And I was like, oh, okay. So yeah, no, that was hard work. I enjoyed it, but it was very hard work.
Yeah, you balance a lot in the book. You were mentioning earlier that the heart has a lot to do with like Jamie's relationship with her mother, but that there's also this historical element. There's also her relationship with her partner Ro, and there's also a couple of subplots about her life as an academic, both with the students that she teaches as well as the progress of her dissertation. I was wondering how much of that was all present at the beginning versus how much of that was like, I'm really going to need to spend some time with this guy.
Yeah, no, I mean, the first draft that I wrote back in 2020 is basically just Jamie and her mother kind of messing around and like having these conversations about like magic and about what will get Jamie's mother out of her funk, and like how can Jamie's mother kind of figure out what she wants from life so that she can put out healthy desires through her magical workings and stuff. And that was basically, and like Ro, the partner, was in there a little bit, the teaching was in there a little bit. And like the other stuff just kind of grew as the novel went on, like as I revised it, as I kept building it out, because it felt like it all needed to be in there. And like, I feel like the heart of the novel definitely still is the mother-daughter stuff. But, I feel like it doesn't work without that other stuff, because it is very much about, a lot of what's going on in this book is Jamie kind of growing up a little bit and realizing that she's not as smart as she thinks she is. Kind of, which I feel like every book I write is going to have a character, like a main character who realizes that, oh, I am actually full of shit.
I was going to say, talk about 18th century literature, like realizing that you've been overestimating your abilities and you need healthier desires is like, that's the development of virtue right there.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah, no, I mean, and yeah.
Yeah. I wonder too if you can talk to us just a little bit more about like Jamie's development as a character, again, without getting into too many details about what happens, but like, I'm just sort of curious, like, how does she get to where she's going?
Yeah, I mean, I love Jamie as a protagonist. She is definitely like a wannabe academic at the start of the book. She talks like an academic. She kind of thinks like in fake academic speak, which luckily people seem to think works okay. Like academics I showed it to were like, yeah, this is real.
I was going to say, did you research that as heavily as you did the 18th century?
I mean, not as heavily, but I did talk to a bunch of people, and I did like show it to a bunch of people. But yeah, I feel like Jamie is, I mean, I feel like Jamie is in denial about a lot of stuff at the start of the book, and like I feel like the crux of it really is this thing where she can do magic, and she has never told her partner about this important thing in her life, and she thinks that that's fine because she kind of tells herself it's not a big deal. The magic doesn't even do anything really, and also she can't talk about it or it'll stop working, and so she can't tell her partner, but she can tell her mom, and like I feel like I think a lot of what's going on in this book is Jamie telling herself that her mom needs help, but not recognizing that she also needs to heal, and she also needs to she hasn't really dealt with a lot of stuff that happened,
That also feels true to life. I usually begin to realize that I need to change when I start thinking, there's someone in my life who really needs to change. And they need me to tell them. And then we have a big fight, and then I think, oh, I needed to change something.
Yeah, and I think Jamie really wants to be a teacher, and she really wants to, she's very passionate about helping people make sense of stories, which is something I'm also super passionate about. But, she also, like I said, she has got a lot of denial about the stories in her own life, and I don't know, yeah.
Well, given that you did so much research, I would love to get a little bit of recommendations from you of either people who want to read more along the lines of the 18th century stuff that you've been researching, or other books with fake books inside them.
Oh my gosh.
Anything, because I know you at one point posted a picture of all the 18th century
novels.
Oh my gosh,
yeah.
For this.
Oh yeah.
Give us some recommendations.
Oh, one more thing about Jamie that is really important that actually I didn't mention when you asked me about who Jamie is and how I got into her character. Jamie is a BDSM submissive, and this is something that's I was like, am I going to be okay keeping this in the book? I've written a lot of stories that were BDSM themed, but I'd never put that just into a novel as this is just going to be one aspect of the character. And I feel like part of what I love about Jamie's relationship with Ro is that they do have this really intense BDSM relationship, but it's not the crux of the story. It's not the problem in their relationship. It's not a problem for Jamie. It's not something that she needs to fix or address or something. It's just part of who she is. And I've been really gratified that people have been responding to that so far as just yeah, it's very matter of fact. It's very it's very sweet. When we see them playing, it's actually really nice. Okay, so 18th century recommendations. Yeah, I mean, oh, the other thing is Jamie she's a submissive in her relationships, but it's really clear. I want to make it really clear that that's she's also capable of taking charge in the classroom. She's not this one-dimensional whatever, which was something that was really important to me. Okay, so sorry, 18th century stuff. I mean, there's a bunch of books that I recommend at the end of this book. There's a whole reading list. I'm obsessed with, there's a couple of biographies that are super fun. I didn't really include her in the book much, but Letitia Pilkington is a super fascinating character. Do you know about Letitia Pilkington?
I do. And it also, I wanted to compliment you on, speaking of just incredible names, everyone in this book has the name they deserve. That part actually, to bring us forward a century, felt very Dickensian.
Oh, yeah.
When I met a character with a certain name, I was like, I know what you're like.
Yeah, I mean, that passage I read a moment ago, I noticed as I was reading it, there's a character named Bettina Quark, who we never meet. Literally, there's one reference to Bettina Quark in the entire book, and I was I think when I wrote that, I was I have to give her a name that you know exactly who she is without knowing anything about her. So her name is Bettina Quark, and I'm just you can picture Bettina Quark.
Which I think, again, is 18th century. It's not quite the Pilgrim's Progress, where everyone's name is just Good Guy McSmiles.
I love the Pilgrim's Progress.
I do too, but I just mean by the 18th century, you get morally informative names.
Do good. Do bad. Do bad.
So you have a sense of what that person is. But yeah, Bettina Quark is a person who is your social rival, and you do not like them.
Yeah, I can just tell. I feel there's certain, especially the less I'm going to tell you about a character, the more I want to give them a name that just sticks in your head. But yeah, so Letitia Pilkington, there's a great biography of her. Her husband was a jerk, who, decided he wanted to divorce her. And so he kept trying to like catch her catch her with another man so he could have an excuse to divorce her. And so he would send her on these long trips with his male friends, and they would try to seduce her, and she would just be like, what are you doing? Get away from me. And finally, after years of this, she finally did decide, screw it, I'm gonna hook up with this other dude. And her husband instantly burst in with 10 night watchmen, like 10 dudes, just to be witnesses that he caught her in bed with this other man. And they were just reading books. Anyway, but so she went on, so her husband threw her out, she lost all her money, she was out on the street with nothing, and she basically wrote this tell-all memoir that became a huge hit and completely destroyed her husband by writing this brutal tell-all memoir and destroyed all these other people who were jerks to her. I love her so much. There's a book called Companions Without Vows that's like an academic book, but it's basically just like a thick slice of just gossip from the 18th century about who was gay, who was just who was, I don't know, it's incredible.
That one I actually wrote down. I was like, if you don't mention it, I've got to
Oh my God, have you read it?
No, that one I have not read.
I've got it. I can let it to
other interviews. You mentioned it.
It is saucy. It's a saucy book. And it's just it's about, technically it's about the thing where in the 18th century, unmarried women who reached a certain age and weren't rich had to find a place for themselves, and women who were married or who had money would just take on these unmarried women as their companion, which was kind of a servant, kind of a best friend who lives with you, kind of just someone you can abuse. And there was a lot of that. There was a lot of just people treating their companions like utter garbage. But there was also a lot of
like Johnny Carson.
What?
Well, his second banana, he was always...
Oh, right, yeah. But there's also a lot of lesbians. I mean, in the 18th century, a lot of very clearly lesbian situations. And and there were women who tried to start an all-woman utopian community in Bath, and based on this novel that one of them had written called Millennium Hall, that was wouldn't it be great if we had an all-woman community and men could just go fuck off into the sun. No offense.
Believe me, none taken. I've run through all the questions that I wrote down, in part because I failed to take into account how wonderfully rapidly you and I talk. So I do want to leave a minute before we open it up to questions from the audience. If there's just anything that I failed to ask you that you think would be great for the good people here tonight to know about this book, that you want to talk about.
We talked about the 18th century stuff. We talked about the mom. We talked about, I don't know.
Do you want to talk about May at all?
Yeah, I love May. And that was, okay, so this is a thing. This book went through so many phases. There were so many versions of this book. And, there was, I ended up building out the 18th century stuff a lot. There was just, my editor was really can you just, add 10 times more 18th century stuff to this book? And so I went back and did that and, built it out more and kind of added a lot more layers of that and made it kind of more integrated in a way that I'm really happy with. But also, there was a moment where I'd shown it to a bunch of beta readers, and people were having a hard time connecting with the mom character, Serena. And so I went back and wrote another 30,000 words of Serena's backstory of her marriage to this woman, May, and how they got together in the 90s and how they lived through all this lesbian activism in the 90s and the 2000s, how they had this kid who turned out to be trans. I love May so much. May ended up being just a joy to write more of. And I feel like the book wouldn't really work the way it does if we didn't get to know May in all those flashbacks. And, you find out on page 2 that May is dead. So it's not really a spoiler. It really sucks. Because May, I feel like part of what I did when I added all that stuff was I really brought May to life in a way that she hadn't been before. And, and so we really get to know her. And I love May, and just I was so happy that my editor was totally cool with me having not particularly explicit, but playful BDSM scenes in the book. Also, May is a sex worker, and May does a bunch of other stuff. There's a part in the book where May is working as a pro dom, and Jamie, who's a little kid, thinks that May is a social worker, and they're well, it's kind of the same thing. It's basically pro doms are basically social workers, and they do a lot of the same stuff, and so and like, I mean they help people, you know, deal with things. I don't know, and but yeah. Anyway, I feel like May, like when May is doing, like I feel like May's sex work is just like, I hope I handle it in this very matter of fact, friendly way. That's just like, it's sweet. Like I feel like I don't see enough portrayals, especially where it's not the point of the book, enough portrayals of sex work where it's just like, yeah, you know, she's a sex worker and she's, you know, it's a tough job sometimes, but she's also able to have fun sometimes. And, you know, customers suck in every line of work. No offense to all the customers here. You know, please buy my book and be nice to the bookstore staff. But yeah, I mean, anyway, I feel like May's sex work is something that, you know, I just felt like part of what makes this book so gay is not just that everybody in the book is gay, pretty much, or trans or whatever, but also just that things like BDSM and sex work and just like unconventional living arrangements are not treated as like, this is going to be a problem that we're going to discuss.
Or even that this is going to drive a lot of the plot. It's just sort of like, this will inform the plot because this is the character. But this isn't like, wow, I have to have this conversation and reveal sex work or reveal a BDSM relationship. It's just like, and here it is.
Yeah. And I feel like May is just a really playful, gentle, sweet person. And that she brings that to her sex work. She brings it to everything she does. She also has a horrible bookstore job where her coworker is horrible to her. And that was, you know,
I'm sure based on a different bookstore in a different.
It was based on a different bookstore. It was based on a bookstore that I worked at briefly back in the day when I was right out of college.
Do you feel like settling any scores right now?
I mean, you know, that bookstore went under soon after I stopped working there, and the fact that the manager of the bookstore, they hired this guy to be the manager, and he didn't know how to work anything. Like he could not work the register, and it was me and this other person, and then this manager, and the other person was young and female presenting and attractive, and he would just like get her to constantly explain how to use the register, like every day. It was like, can you show me how to use the register again? And like,
what is money going to be different today?
I mean, he just did that. It was like computerized. He couldn't figure it out. There was like a whole inventory system that he couldn't understand. And like, you know, one time we sold somebody a book, and I'm still cringe when I think about this.
Well,
we sold somebody a book. And this manager who did not know how to work the register accidentally underpriced the book by about $20. It was an expensive book. He charged like $10 and it should have been $30. And this was happened to be the guy who bought the book, happened to be someone I knew and had met. And the manager was like, you have to go to his house and ask him for the $20.
He left the premises?
He had left the premises, and the manager was like, please ask him to pay the extra money. And I was like, I don't think he will. And so I was like, I went to visit him and was like, hi, I'm so sorry. My boss is an asshole. We undercharged you for this book. Do you feel like giving us the rest of the money? And he was like, no. And I was like, fair enough. No, I can't actually say anything about that. I tried.
Like a perfect note for us to close on. I don't think we're going to top that. I think we should take questions from the audience.
Anybody? Questions?
We obviously don't have to. We could just. You can tell us
I see someone on the stairs. Hi.
You mentioned that this book has had like a lot of different versions, but I'm wondering if you could speak to like your editing process as you're like going through all these versions.
Yeah, thank you. So the question was, can I speak to all the editing process and how the book went through all these different versions? I mean, gosh, it had such a long and kind of twisty road. Because I filled like 2 or 3 blank notebooks with just scribbles in 2020, and those were super rough. And there were versions where it went in a very different direction. Like there were versions where after Jamie teaches Serena magic, Serena kind of becomes a bit of a supervillain, and I was glad I moved away from that because I actually feel like that's not as interesting as Serena being a flawed but ultimately good and decent person who makes mistakes. Like, which I feel like is harder to deal with in some ways than just, like, and, you know, there was a version where Serena learns to do magic and she's instantly rich and famous or whatever, and I was just like, that doesn't ring true. It feels like putting too much weight on the magic, and also it just turns Serena into this caricature, kind of like a terrible person or whatever. And But I mean, yeah, so then that changed over the course of time. I kind of had to go back and do a lot with those scribbles to make them into like a book. And that took ages. I have to type it all in, which always takes longer than you think. And then, just kind of looking at all the gaps, looking at what's missing and starting to realize like, okay, I have all this super vague stuff about Jamie's job. Can I make that more specific? Can I like describe this college campus in one page in a way that you can kind of feel like you're going to remember some stuff about it, but we're not going to spend too much time on it. And so like weird little details, like they dismantled a Scottish castle and tried to reassemble it and then realized they couldn't reassemble it. And so they just turned it into a college building, which is something that like just felt funny to me. I don't know. And yeah, and like slowly building out the relationship with Ro. And I feel like I ended up at some point with what I was calling a second draft in like 2021 or 2022, which was still very bare bones. And like figuring out the ending took a long time. Like I feel like the ending was very different originally. Like it was always some version of that ending, but it wasn't that. It wasn't what it is now. Just making it kind of like hit the way it needed to hit. And the opening, I rewrote the first chapter like 100 times. And like my editor actually went in and like was like, let's move this sentence here. Let's shorten this, like really like granularly to make the first chapter. The first chapter was so slow. At one point I went to a convention, like a feminist sci-fi convention in the Midwest. And I read the first chapter and I was like, realizing as I was reading it to people, oh, this is draggy as heck. Like they're wandering around the woods and it's just taking too long. And just like ruthlessly going through and streamlining and combining and cutting and like these two paragraphs can be one paragraph. That kind of stuff is always very painstaking, but it really matters, especially in those opening chapters, but throughout. You don't ever want people to feel like, oh, it's just bogging down. And then, yeah, over time I had a draft that I was really happy with, but like I said before, at some point I was like, we need to understand Serena better, so I need to write like 30,000 words of Serena backstory, and I actually showed just that 30,000 word excerpt to a bunch of my friends who had kids, and who, because I was like, a lot of this is about parenting, and I want to make sure I'm not like, as someone who's never been a parent, I want to make sure I'm describing this the right way. And, and then adding all the 18th century stuff was probably one of the last big things that I had to do, because I had a version where there was like little bits of 18th century stuff here and there, and my editor was like, can we just like really amp that up and make it like, I feel like this could be a really fun part of the book if we built it out a bit more. And that was when I went and reread Possession and built all that stuff out. So it was a lot of like layer on layer on layer to get to what we have. And then there was just more tweaking and editing after that. So, kind of a process. Thank you. Yeah. Anybody else? Hi, in the front row.
Hi. I just read All the Birds in the Sky a few months ago, and I've read some of your other work, and I love the way that you use magic and also address technology and current issues. And I'm wondering, both as a writer and as an editor and as a reviewer, how do you view that fantasy sci-fi boundary and integration? And when you write, does the way that these genres interact ever come to bear on your own writing?
I mean, it's so funny because I was at a convention a little while ago where Annalie and I were on a couple of panels where they were like genre and genre divisions and like how do we deal with genre labels? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Like, I feel like at this point in 2025, it's over. Like, it's just over. Like, when you think about what's popular, what the kids like, what people, anybody who's come up in the 21st century likes, it's all just like a mishmash. The Marvel Universe has like robots and aliens and wizards and, mystical creatures, and like Adventure Time, which I'm obsessed with, has magic in a post-apocalyptic world with lots of weird science stuff. I feel like literally everything that's popular now is both. And like, even just in the time since I wrote All the Birds in the Sky, it's gotten so much more like that. Like, I sweated over that when I wrote All the Birds in the Sky, like, oh, am I going to get trouble for mixing science fiction and fantasy? And now it's just like, like Rika Aoki wrote this incredible book, The Light from Uncommon Stars, where it's just like, oh yeah, there's the devil and like mystical stuff, and there's also aliens running a donut shop out of their starship, and like there's just like all these different things, and it's just like, yeah, whatever, it's a story, we can do what we want. And I feel like I actually do monthly book reviews for the Washington Post, and like there's like a few commenters. I shouldn't say this on, it's gonna be on the internet. Oh no. Well, there's a few commenters who are always like, you know, this isn't really sci-fi or this isn't really fantasy or why are, you know, like they get really hung up on that distinction, and I'm just like, really? In 2025 we're still doing that? Like, it's all fantastical stories. It's all just like stuff that like is in some way a fantasy. Most science fiction stuff has like an element of fantasy to it, like faster than light travel or whatever. In terms of like, I mean, I always want to like be mindful about technology, and like this book has little bits and pieces about technology in it. Like, you know, Jamie is finishing her PhD and teaching at a college where they've decided to invest a ton of money in this like thing to use algorithms to analyze great works of literature so that nobody needs to read them ever again. And like, I wrote that in like 2020 or 2021, and I was like, that's really funny. People using algorithms and LLMs so that we don't have to read or write fiction anymore. That'll never really happen. And of course, so yeah, but I feel like I'm always interested in magic and technology and how they interact. And like, I think that, you know, we live in a world where technology is ubiquitous and where a lot of people have magical thinking about technology. But I think it's just always really interesting to play with that. And I did kind of noodle a bit on a sequel to All the Birds in the Sky, which people who pre-ordered this book will get a PDF in probably a few weeks of that. And it was interesting to come back to that dichotomy from this new perspective. Thank you. Questions? Annalie, hi.
Sorry. Well, I was wondering, because so much of the book does deal with the 18th century, what do you feel that the 18th century has to tell us about our present moment?
Yay! Oh my God, thank you. The question is, what does the 18th century have to teach us about our present moment? And I mean, I'm obsessed with the 18th century, as I said, and I'm kind of like, I wish people would kind of just stop with the 19th century and get with the 18th century. Like, I feel like the 18th century is so interesting. It's this moment, like, somebody finally just explained this to me, like one of the professors I was interviewing, and I was like, oh. So, going back slightly, 1660, the Restoration, we beheaded King Charles I, and there was like a period of like puritanical rule in England, where basically fun was prohibited, and like pretty much literally. Like, you know, and then 1660, we put Charles II on the throne, I guess. And it's the Restoration. And for like a period of about 70 years, fun is encouraged. And there's this flowering of feminist writing in the 1660s and the 1670s. You get Aphra Behn. You get, you know, all these like Mary Astle. I wrote about this in my newsletter. You get all these women writing this, like these amazing feminist texts. And then around like 1730-ish, things start to clamp down again. There's a moment of, you know, conservatism once again. And it goes hand in hand with a bunch of other stuff, like improving technology. Like, you know, England has all these colonies all over the place and is getting rich off of, in part, chattel slavery and and genocide of indigenous people. And that is fueling the beginnings of the British Empire. Industrialization is starting to happen in England. You know, I forget when you have William Blake writing about the Satanic Mills, but it's sometime after that, I guess. But, you know, you have industrialization starting to happen, and you have the birth of the urban middle class, and you have the birth of reading for pleasure. Like, people who are not like the nobility can just get a book and read it and have fun, and like the urban kind of, some of the servants and a lot of the middle class people can read books and enjoy them. And all of this goes hand in hand, all of this improving technology and wealth and power goes hand in hand with this idea that women should shut the hell up and get back in the house and stop trying to be in the world, stop trying to participate in society, and that a woman's proper place is the domestic sphere, and that women should really never be heard from again. And you have women like Eliza Haywood, who in the 1720s are writing these barnstorming like scandal books of like, woo, and then she did something saucy, and then woo, and like, you know, not like political per se, but books about women having a darn good time, kind of. And then Eliza Haywood So she's writing all these books in the 1720s that are like super fun and like scandal books. And then in the 1730s, she's like, and she pivots to writing morality books about how women can be good, about how women can behave, about how to be, virtuous and, not upset the patriarchy, because she wants to get paid and she's got her career to think about. And so she pivots to more conservative stuff. And so that feels very relevant to me today, both like new information technology, like the printing press, basically, and also the kind of sudden clampdown on, and it all comes to a head in 1737 with the Licensing Act, where they shut down all the theaters. This vibrant culture that had been this place where people could really like have subversive stories and also hang out and gossip and like be, hang out with sex workers basically, and hang out with like cut purses and like rogues and, slatterns and, rakes. The theaters are all shut down except for a couple of officially sanctioned theaters. It's the end of this whole culture, and everything, it's just, so it feels very relevant to right now. And like the debates over, how we can be moral and virtuous but still have a life feel very relevant. And also just like, I don't know, the other thing is just that the 18th century is super saucy and interesting, and like you do have all these feuds and like, just really colorful characters, like I mentioned. And like, I've written about this a lot in my newsletter lately, so y'all can buttondown.com/Charlie Dane. You can find it all there. Hi.
How do you decide when to incur magic? Like, what makes it feel real or unreal enough to include it, and when? How do you just, like, do you have any ideas that you scratch for that?
Yeah, how do I decide when and how to include magic and how to make it feel real? I mean, some of that is the decision I make before I even start writing about like what kind of story I'm writing. Like, is this going to be a fantasy? Is it going to be something else? And like, that really is. But also, it's kind of a little bit vibes based in a way. It is very much about like thinking about, where the characters are and what they're doing and what would make sense and what would be surprising. I want magic to be surprising. I never want it to be like, oh, and of course we did a spell and then this happened, and like it's like that was super easy. Like I always want it to be kind of like magic is a little bit confusing and surprising. So I try to use magic like almost like jokes. Like jokes have to kind of come out of nowhere and feel like surprising in a way, or they're not funny enough. And I feel like magic has to be the same way, except instead of being funny, it has to be like, kind of like, oh, that happened. And like, I feel like that's kind of part of it. But also I just, when I spend enough time writing about a particular world and how they do magic there, I always kind of get a sense in my head of how it works and what it's going to do. Even if it's not like a set of rules, it's just like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense. But like, there's a couple places in this book where something magical happens, and it really was just like, it just kind of came out of nowhere. Like I didn't really expect it to happen. There's like a big scene about a third of the way through the book where something really startling happens, actually involving Ro, Jamie's partner, and that was a surprise to me. I was like, oh, okay, I guess that's happening, and then it made sense, so I went with it. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Since we kind of
Okay, one more poem. Sorry, they have a one more question sign. They also have a one more poem sign. So like either a poem or a question. Poem or question, either one. Anybody? Okay, on the stairs. Hi.
Yeah, hi. My question is about what was the turning point where you said, hey, these doodles need to be something more?
I mean, I guess I like doodling in books. I used to, I used to just write really long messages in books. Like, if you look at a book that I signed to someone back in, 2020 or 2018 or whatever, there would just be, a paragraph about something. And often it would be really surreal and silly and weird. And at some point, I think that just started to kind of lose its... that started to not be as fun anymore. I felt like I'd kind of done that. But I started to do more doodles, and I really like drawing cats, and occasionally I'll draw other things, but I like drawing cats. And I don't know, I have fun with it sometimes, and I don't think about it too hard. I just try to do something cute and silly and interesting, especially if it's to someone specific. And I guess there's part of me that's like, if someone buys a hardcover, this is $30. I want them to get something really, really special. What? Or 10. Or 10. Yeah, if you're that guy, that's right. Yeah, so I guess I have a little bit of imposter syndrome, so I'm just like, I want to make it worth your while, but also, I don't know, I want you to get something that's like kind of unique and silly and cute. And like, I got a text while I was on my way here from Alex Hanna, who co-wrote the book The AI Con, which is all about like how generative AI is kind of like all hype and it's not real and it's kind of ridiculous. And I totally forgot I did this, but Alex pre-ordered my book. And so I drew him a little doodle of a cat looking at a bird in a cage. And the bird is a stochastic parrot, which is what stochastic parrots are like what Alex and her co-writer Emily call AI, because it just parrots back to you what it's heard elsewhere. It doesn't actually know anything. It just recites stuff. And so I was like, the bird is like planning to eat the stochastic parrot. And Alex really liked that, and I'd forgotten I did that until Alex texted me a picture, and I was like, "Oh yeah, the bird's eating the stochastic parrot." So I got to giggle at something that I'd forgotten I did. But yeah, I don't know. I just, it really depends on the day and like how many people are in line behind the person I'm doodling for. But I like to do doodles that are like something high concept and silly and weird. And thank you. Yay! Thank you all. You're so wonderful.